knew she was a house plant nut, I guess. She takes care of all the plants at the library and they look beautiful. And she's always like taking in people's plants and, treating them for their ills, and is usually very successful. And she also teaches us all how to propagate. So if we want more of something, she's always giving us lessons. So since we've really looked for someone to speak about houseplants for years, she seemed like the perfect person to do that. So she herself has a house full of plants. And like I said, in addition, she cares for many of her friends and coworkers' plants. She loves helping us take care of their ills, and she usually cures them. And she says she's a self-taught houseplant propagator, but she's also an Iowa master gardener. She came to Orcas after growing up on a farm in Iowa, and then after college living and working in Washington, D.C. and several other areas of the country. She is a busy homeschooling parent of 3 sons and works part-time at the library as a library associate. She also loves to travel, backpack, and I'm not kidding, all the time, hike, camp, kayak, and all things outdoors with her family and friends, especially her sons.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here, Lynn.
All right. Is that good?
Yeah, you want to bend it a little closer to your face.
Closer to my face. Okay. All right, there we go. Yeah, Kate asked me to talk about houseplants a couple months ago, and when for the garden club, and when she did, I thought, okay, what do I know about houseplants that everybody else doesn't already know? It isn't, to me, it kind of comes naturally, but also that's from probably being a master gardener. But then as I was thinking this through, what do I really want to say? What is the secret sauce of raising houseplants? I came across this quote that said, there are no green thumbs when it comes to raising houseplants. There's just people with big windows. And that really drives home the biggest thing we're going to talk about today, which is light. And I'm going to come back to that. When I did my master gardener training in 2015 in Iowa, I was very into growing food outdoors, obviously, and wasn't that interested in houseplants back then. And of course, this is in Iowa where it's easy to grow food, and it's lovely to grow like 50-pound tomato plants that you can't even lift out of the ground at the end of the season because they're so big and heavy. And then we moved here. And I haven't really grown food since we got here, partly because we haven't had the right property, the right soil, the right light. And so I think my green thumb energy just kind of channeled into houseplants, which are of course all the rage these days. And that's been a lot of fun to learn a new thing. But when I was doing the master gardener training back in 2014, I was like, and those of you that have done the course here, I think it's the same in San Juan County. There's a series of 3-hour, pretty intense courses on different subjects every week. And the 3-hour course on houseplants, I was like, oh God, I'm dreading this. And it was fascinating. The guy that taught it said things that I still remember to this day that I didn't know about growing plants indoors. And so that was a really valuable thing to actually learn from. He was a horticulturist, rather than learning from an app or from blogs or the internet, where there's a lot of misinformation about how to raise plants indoors. So I learned a lot doing that. I tried to actually went and had my mom mail me my master gardener notes from that class. They were still in my drawer in Iowa. And to see like, okay, I'm going to teach a class. I have to figure out what I want to talk about. So I went through all of that, and it actually came in handy like years later. So that was cool. This is my kitchen about a month ago. When Kate asked me to talk, I was like, can I have April or March or May? Because there's a lot that you can do outside as well, but with houseplants this time of year, including repotting them, which is what we're doing here. But when it comes to this, what I'm going to talk about today, when you're growing plants indoors, it's really important, as it is outdoors too, to understand the conditions that your plant is growing in, and that they're, of course, not this plant's native or natural conditions, but light, temperature, and humidity matter. And then how you care for the plant depends largely on the amount of light your plant is getting and how it's surviving in this like brutal indoor environment that doesn't want to be in. And then also accepting up there that it's a living thing, that they're going to die. They're not always going to be happy indoors. that they're gonna, maybe you have to adapt your expectations to learn to like the minimalist look, for example, with certain plants that aren't gonna look as full as they do in the nursery. And then understanding light, which we're going to talk about for the most more than any of the other things. But if you understand light, the water, soil, fertilizer, repotting, pruning, everything else will fall into place and be based on the light that your plant is getting and whether it's getting adequate light or not. So that's what we're going to talk about today. With the conditions your plant is in your home, light, temperature, and humidity. The most important of these is light. I'm not going to talk much about temperature or humidity. In general, if you are comfortable in your home, temperature-wise, your plant will be too. If your home, I leave my thermostat at like 50 degrees when I leave town for a week or two, and they're fine. So temperature isn't a big factor in terms of your conditions. And humidity, I think, with regard to houseplants, is overrated. It's I don't ever mist my plants. I don't ever have them sitting on pebble trays. Usually the humidity in your house is adequate. I don't grow ferns. I especially don't grow maidenhair ferns because maidenhair and I don't get along. So this could be, there are certain varieties of plants that maybe it matters more than others, but the light meter I'm going to show you has a humidity monitor on it. So you know what you're working with. And if you need to add a humidifier to your home, you can do that. It's more, I think, prevalent in drier areas of the country than it is here. But in general, I don't have any issues with humidity. I don't humidify my home at all. The picture there is of a nursery where, of course, the humidity levels are higher. One thing to remember about light, temperature, and humidity is when you're buying a plant and bringing it home, it's coming from this super steroid environment of a ton of light, great humidity, and the perfect temperature, and you're bringing it home, and it's going to have to adapt to that. So we'll talk about that later. And I put this picture of the Aeonia here under temperature. That's a house plant that is, for me, it's a house plant. In California, these are outdoor plants, and it's kind of a borderline house plant that does have some different temperature requirements. It likes to be cold in the winter. So if you're growing a lemon tree indoors, temperature will matter. You want it to be cooler in the winter so that it grows fruit in the spring. So there are a few plants where temperature matters, but by and large, the ones I grow, the ones that most people grow at home don't. The temperature doesn't matter. So, but light does. And then the light you have will impact water, fertilizing, repotting, and everything else. So these little, I should have brought one, but these little tags that come with plants that you buy at the store where they're like bright indirect light, moderate water, I'd ignore all of that. I think it's more important to just understand what your plant needs and then give it what it needs. And those instructions are so vague that they're not useful. But all of this is based on light. And then let nature take its course. There's a yellow, yellow leaves are normal as plants age, the older leaves die. I don't care about brown tips on plants, on spider plants. I just let perfection's not the goal for me. That's fine. I kill plants all the time. I put this Dieffenbachia here because I killed 4 Dieffenbachias this year, which is also, it's a dumb cane. I don't know what it is about them or where I got bad information, or we're just not like, we aren't communicating well. But I'm not sure, the roots rotted, and I got one for the library and it died on my desk. And then a friend of mine is out of town and she gave me a bunch of plants to house sit and it died. So I was like, I'll go to Home Depot and buy another one and replace it and then give it back to her right away before I kill it. It's okay. I just am not going to grow Dieffenbachia anymore, or I'm going to learn more about that plant before I buy another one. But the point is that you're learning about plants as you go. And it's not a big, just because you kill a plant doesn't mean you can't grow houseplants or that you have a black thumb. You just have to adjust your expectations or adjust your care routine or learn a little bit more about the plant. But for now, Dieffenbachia and I are on break. So, let's see. So let there be light. Light is the most important and least understood aspect of growing houseplants. Again, because we're bringing them into this indoor environment that is much darker than we realize and then that our eye can tell. And then the instructions plants come with, which is often bright indirect light or a little bit of direct sun, a little bit of indirect light. It's so vague and non-quantifiable and pointless. And then everywhere you look, depending on what blog article you're reading, is different too. And then there's like the Instagram effect where you're looking at these beautiful plant displays on Instagram and they're across the room from the windows. It's like, oh, they're growing their plants with no light. I must be able to do that too. no, that doesn't work. They moved them there for the photo and then they're moving them back to the window, or they just bought them and they just haven't died yet. So, so this is an example of the kind of instructions a lot of plants come with. That means nothing to me. And so I would just ignore all that and learn what your plant needs. So light will impact everything else you do, water, soil, fertilizing. The descriptions are vague, and that, like I said, the human eye is adapted to adjust what we see based on the light that's in the room, but plants don't see something completely different than what our human eye sees. So we are very bad judges of indoor light, which is where the light meter comes in. And this is a new toy to me. I grew plants for years without a light meter, and I just got this not that long ago. And it shows on it, I'll hold it up to the camera here, but you can see that number 394, it's measuring in foot candles the amount of light that's in that spot where that plant is. It also has humidity and temperature on it too. The humidity in here right now is 37%, in case you're wondering. And where I'm standing, I have, of course, the lights are off and we're indoors and the blinds are closed. I have 7 foot candles where I am right now. If you were the library is going to have one of these to check out. I haven't processed it yet, but it'll probably be ready in about a week. We'll come to the library and ask for this. You don't really even, this one is from my friend Daryl, who's not, I don't know him personally, but he's my houseplant friend online. And this is his own designed light meter, but you can get a regular light meter at Home Depot too. And this is about $100. The cool thing about checking it out from the library is you don't really need this year round every day. You can walk around your house and be like, oh, this is what my light levels are here and here and here. And then maybe do that 6 months later at the opposite, in an opposite season. Do it in the morning, midday, and afternoon. And you just start to have a more intuitive sense of light. You don't need to have this and be checking it like every day. You don't need to own it. You can just borrow the one at the library when you need it. But it takes away the guessing. Especially, like I said, when you're bringing a plant home. We'll talk more about foot candle numbers in a second, but the amount of light plants in a nursery are getting is phenomenally larger than what you're going to have at home. And so, of course, they're going to decline when you bring them home, unless you're getting a plant from a friend or propagating your own where it's being raised in that environment. Then you don't have that. So I buying plants on like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or getting them from friends. Hand-me-downs are great things because they've already adapted to whatever light, temperature, and humidity you have in a home, and they're not having this big decline after coming home from a nursery. Thrives in low light. This means the plant will die less slowly, but it'll be dying as it comes along. ZZ plants and sometimes peace lilies and snake plants are. You see them in like it'd be like in a corner over there of the room, 20 feet from a window, like have almost no light, and it'll not die for years. It might not die ever, but it's not going to grow. So thrives in low light is quite a misnomer in terms of indoor plants. One person said it's a miscommunication between horticulturists and interior designers, which I think is kind of accurate. So if the light meter notwithstanding, if you get down to like, go sit next to your plant and like look up, and this is what my plant sees. Does it see the sun on the right? If it sees the sun, it's getting direct light. And then you're wanting to know how many hours of direct light it's getting. And of course, for succulents and cacti, those need direct light. Everything else is bright indirect light, or is indirect light, whether it's bright or not, remains to be seen. So if you're measuring indirect light on the left, you're measuring the intensity and you're using the light meter to measure the foot candles. And if it's direct light, especially if it's mostly direct light, it's how many hours of sun, full sun that plant is getting for succulents in particular. And that's called the daily light intervals. I didn't put a slide in there on that, but that gets kind of technical. But in general, succulents like a certain number of hours of sun, 4 to 5 to 6 hours of direct sun a day. And then what the intensity of the indirect light they're getting doesn't really matter that much. So this is, so there's this silver convex light sensor on the light meter, and this is a mock-up of what this sensor or the plant that you're measuring is seeing. And so the image on the left is in a nursery, and you can see that it's other than the framing of the greenhouse, it's all sky. The image on the right is a plant sitting in Daryl's apartment, and this little section here, right in there, is the amount of sky or indirect light that that plant sees from where it's sitting, even though it's sitting right up against his window. So he has ceiling, right? And he has this obstruction, it looks like an awning to the building that he's living in, perhaps, or it could be shades on the windows. I can't imagine Daryl would have shades on his windows, so it must be an awning. So this little section is how much actual sky that plant sees, which surprised me when I started actually like getting down to where my plants are and looking up. There's not that much sky. That's why the size of your windows means like whether your plants are going to survive or not. Little windows show much less sky. And then your light meter, if you measure this, will confirm the difference. Like this will be like 5,000, 4,000. They probably have a shade cloth on here, so it's not direct sun unless they're growing cacti. This is like 5,000 foot candles. If it's direct sun and you take this outside, you're going to get like 10,000. Direct, like bright sun is 10,000 or so. This, who knows, it could be 200, 400 foot candles. I don't know. But when you figure out where to put your plants in your house, you're looking for the widest possible view of the sky. So that's what he has for this plant. And the distance from the window makes a huge difference. And so do outdoor obstructions like this awning. And here where we live, a lot of our houses have big, tall trees. So I do have big 12-foot windows in my house, but I have trees all outside. So when I reconfigured my thinking to look how much sun or sky my plants see in my house from those windows, it's way less than I thought, because there's so many trees outside. They're a ways outside, but they are definitely blocking part of the sky. So it doesn't mean my plants don't do well, but it means that the light readings were a lot lower than I thought when I measured it with the light meter. So here's an example. How much light do plants need? Succulents, most ficus, these are the higher light requirement plants. For good growth, 800-foot candles to maintain them so they don't decline. That's the column on the right. So then you have your mid-level ones, and then the ones that are supposedly the ones that thrive in low light. Like I said, where I'm standing right now, I have 7-foot candles right here. I measured by that window when I came in before we, this is the north-facing window here in the Madrona room where we're standing. So it faces north, so the light is already way lower than if this were a south-facing window, but that spot was 71. So even if a plant were sitting right there on that bench, this time of year, it would be getting 71-foot candles, which is lower than the lowest light requirement for the lowest low light plants. So I wouldn't have known that until I started measuring. So that's why light makes such a big difference. And these plants, a lot of them are pretty hardy, maybe not ferns or prayer plants, but the snake plants and the ZZs will survive just fine right there. But you have to change how you water them and how you fertilize them to account for the fact that they're way under the amount of light that they would like to have. So you're going to overwater a plant that isn't getting enough light if you water it according to some arbitrary water every 10 days thing that a plant app is telling you to do. You have to be aware of that so you can account for it. Distance matters. So here's Daryl holding this like mock-up of that light sensor that's on the light meter. There's 400-foot candles right here next to this nice big window. You step 2 feet away, it drops in half, and then another couple feet away, and you're under 100. Again, just being like 3 to 4 feet away from a window. So I'm that person who, if I'm at your house and I see your plants, I'm like, when you're not looking, I'm like, move that a little closer to the window. Is that, or push that, like take that houseplant off your kitchen island and go put it over here above your kitchen sink next to the window, because it can't grow there very well. And that's why, and what a plant will do when it doesn't have enough light is drop leaves and of course slowly decline and just not grow. It'll just be in a state of stasis. That's the best possible outcome is that it just doesn't die and it stays like it is. So this was an eye opener for me too, that I needed to push even my plants like closer to the windows. Every foot counts. So you've got the light meter, you've checked it out from the library, you went home and measured your light and you don't have enough light. And no wonder these plants aren't thriving or that you can't grow this type of plant or that type of plant. What can you do? There's a lot of things you can do to make up for it. You just need to be aware. So this is a place, an Airbnb I stayed at in Italy last summer, and I just loved this plant, but I did not know what it was. And as you can see, it's a fairly dark room with not a lot of windows, even though this was in the summer. It's kind of hard to see here in the drone room. It's a little blown out, but it's in the center of this room and there isn't any direct light on it at all. And I was like, what is that plant and how is he growing it like that? Well, you can ask yourself, if your plants aren't getting enough light, am I satisfied with how it's growing? Maybe it's fine. Maybe you don't mind your snake plant looking like it does. This is actually a monstera, and the leaves, which would normally look like this, there's a few that have lobed out towards the top, but most of them don't. And monstera leaves need more light in order to have the big, huge leaves that we see everywhere. So that are known, that the monstera is known for. So this monstera is quite healthy, but the leaves aren't lobed out. And I actually like that look. I think it's kind of cool because monstera leaves are such a common thing, but they're less common not lobed out. Like, oh, so this plant is living in pretty low light. It's not super happy about that, but it's thriving. It just looks different. If you're happy with that, then leave it where it is, or put it wherever you want to put it, as long as it's not declining. And that's what this plant is doing. Maybe this person puts it outside in the summer, I don't know, or puts it into more light in the summertime. This was in the summer, so it didn't look like that's what they were doing, but there may be other strategies that they have to keep it going, and I don't know. But I do know it's a monstera that's not lobed out because it doesn't get enough light. My plants, I have a lot of succulents because succulents and I get along. I'm a chronic underwater of plants. That's why I don't grow ferns. And my succulents they put up with winter and wait for their day that they can be taken back out to the back deck. So I have a ton of plants outside all summer long, and I like them there. I put them out instead of buying a bunch of annuals. I just put succulents outside, and they get all energized and beautiful, and they take on all this color. And then they go back inside for their winter hibernation and pout about it, but they're fine. And so that's how I account for the fact that maybe my succulents in the winter, especially here, this is far north, they're not getting enough light in the winter, but that's okay because they're spending the summer outside. And when you put succulents outside into the amount of sun they want, they get this, depending on the type of plant you have, but they get this beautiful color. It's like this pinkish fuchsia. Right now, all three of these plants are in my kitchen window, but they're all just pale green. So they get their color when they get the sun that they want. That's when you know they're happy. They get very leggy. The echeveras get very leggy in the winter, and I just cut them back and start them over usually. So if you have plants that you can put outside in the summer, do it. If you've been to the Mediterranean, you see all kinds of succulents and jades living on people's front porches and hanging off their terraces, and that works. There's a few tips to remember when you bring them back in to look for pests and make sure that everything's copacetic and they're not full of any insects, but having them outside will get them through the winter. This is my Instagram worthy plant wall above my son's desk. This came about because of our propagation that we didn't have a place to put all these. So I'm like, well, let's just start like a little plant wall above your desk. This wall is sort of at a perpendicular angle to a north facing window that's right over here. This is when it was new, but eventually some of these plants were really leaning towards the light, and the succulents were like the leaf production was slowing down, so it was very leggy looking. So this actually didn't work, at least not in the winter time. In the summer, there's more light. Now that I have a light meter, I can measure. Now I know why they were doing that. But nevertheless, there isn't enough light here for this. That's why you have to be wary of all the pretty photos you see on social media, because they don't always work that way in real life. So what we have now is I don't know why that photo turned out blurry, but under a grow light, which I brought with me. I'm just getting into grow lights as a way to get sometimes you can use grow lights to get your plants through the winter. Other times you can just have a grow light on a plant all the time if it's in a room that doesn't get enough light and never will, even in the summertime. Grow lights have come a long ways from the old fluorescent things that were used to grow cannabis indoors where you need a ballast and a ballast. These are just LED grow lights you can buy on Home Depot or Amazon. This is a really bright one that I have right here. And I'm gonna you can see it in the picture, but also for the camera, this is the grow light, it's blinding. And then there's cheaper ones that are more the size of a traditional light bulb that put out like a quarter of the amount of light that this one puts out. This one's about $30, and I'll put a link on the, I'll send a link to Kate that she can add to the thing that's gonna go online. Under this grow light, we talked about like the highest number being like 800 for succulents. This grow light is like, if you're right under it right here, the light meter registers at 3,500 foot candles, which is almost like a commercial nursery. It's really high. So where this plant is though, this is a Haworthia that has been under this grow light. Where this one is just like 8 inches away from the center of it is, it drops down to like 300. So the grow lights, you have to be, they really need to be centered on top of a plant, and they don't have a lot of range that they can reach, but they can be really powerful and they can do a lot for your plants. I had all these under here. This Haworthia is sunburned, so it didn't like this light. It was too much for it. It has little brown spots on it. Not brown spots, but like just brown on some of the leaves. This is a string of buttons that was sitting on that plant wall. When I bought it from the nursery, it had these nice, like tight leaves. And then when I brought it home, it stretched out. Can you see that? This is when it went up on the plant wall and wasn't getting enough light, and its leaf, it was alive, it's fine, but I don't like it like that. I like it like this tighter. That's how they're supposed to be. So when I put it under the grow light, it returned back to its normal leaf style. So now it's going to have these funny like tight ones and then loose. So it's fine. I like, it'll just have this, it's like a weird plant anyway, so I don't mind how weird it is. But it was kind of an experiment to see what a grow light would do. You can see like you can really tell that it's changing its growth by being there. This is of course, a Pelea that didn't get enough light, just to show you these light colored leaves here. It was sitting, is it in the picture? Yeah, there's a bunch of those. So these were slowly dying because they weren't getting enough light, and they're not even high light. They were in that middle row that we like 200 to 400, but they were not getting enough light. So they're slowly on the decline, but this would be way too much light for them. So if I were to put this here, I would have it a little farther away, but they did need more light. They don't have a lot, they don't have as much flexibility with how much light they like. So grow lights, look into grow lights. I think that they're great, that they are so much less expensive and easier to use, and you can screw them into regular fixtures. They're too bright to be like lighting for your house that's pleasant. Like this, when this is on, I don't really like to even look at it because it's like almost like the sun. But you can get those IKEA fixtures that's a cheap fixture that hangs from the ceiling, and stick a grow light in it and put it in a room for the winter. There's a lot of ways you can do it. You can Google it and find all kinds of ideas for how to use grow lights to help expand your houseplant selection, expand what you can grow, make your plants fuller if they're too thin for your liking. Something to think about. Or you can rearrange, and this is just my kitchen window in the winter when I rearrange where things go. In the summer, I could probably have these in a north facing window, but in the winter, they need all the light they can get. So I rearrange things. You can take a plant that's on the floor that you thought was getting enough light, and then maybe you do a light meter reading 4 feet higher and realize if this plant were 4 feet higher, it would be getting double the amount of light. So you can hang it or put it on a plant stand. There's a lot of ways, once you have a light meter, that you can make small changes to rearrange how your plants are positioned in your home and get them more light, and then they will hopefully respond positively to that. So with all of that said about light, watering, key thing that I would want you to know about watering is that don't I have apps on my phone even that are like, you're overdue for watering your such and such plant. You're supposed to water it every 7 days. It depends on if it's getting adequate light and if it's dried out or not, and whether it's supposed to be dried out before you water it or not. So those are very rigid guidelines. I like to just stick my finger in a plant and see if it needs water. This is my jade plant sitting outside, and it has, it's hard to see in here, but there's a little Pacific tree frog living in it. So that's why when you bring your plants in the fall, you might want to check for insects, but also frogs. There's a frog in there. He was our friend. He lived in that all winter, all summer long. So cute. So there's really only 3 different watering strategies for houseplants. So you either water when it's completely dry, when it's partially dry, or you want to keep it moist all the time. That's it. So if you know what your plant needs, which one of those 3 categories it falls into, and you know what it needs for light, you know everything you need to know basically to keep it alive if you can meet those needs. So the ZZ plant here, along with succulents and cacti, need to be completely dry. I would say not a vast majority, but a majority of plants want to be watered when they're partially dry, like this fiddle-leaf fig. And then there's the ferns and some others that like to be wet almost all the time. I don't grow those because I'm a chronic underwaterer of plants. So these don't usually end up in my house. This is all true given that there is adequate light, which we've already talked. So make sure you're matching the water with the light. If your plant is underlit, like you're growing it over here in 71-foot candles and would rather be in 200, you need to back off the water. When that plant does finally dry out, if it's not getting enough, and I think this is on the slide, if it's not getting enough light, it's drying out from evaporation, not from using the water and from photosynthesis, which means it's susceptible to root rot. And if you're following this watering strategy when it's underlit, you need to back off the water, and you might need to change the soil and just add more perlite to the soil so that the soil has more aeration, which we'll talk about in a second. But given that there's adequate light, you water whenever it needs it, which is depending on which watering strategy that plant wants. Which you can use a watering meter if you want, but you don't need to. You can just use your finger, and you don't have to be that precise with water if you are precise with light and you know that the plant is getting enough light, then the water doesn't, a little bit too much, a little bit too little water won't be that much of a problem. These are some of my plants that are some of the ficus that do not like direct sun, but I like them to grow faster, and they do grow faster if they're outside in the summer. So I put them outside in the shade, and how I water these in the summer is vastly different from how I water them in the winter when they're indoors, not growing and not getting enough light. And here they're getting way more shade. It's still bright indirect light, but I have to water them way more. And then how to water. So we saturate the soil and of course dump out the saucer, and so it's not sitting in the water, but you do want to make sure the entire soil mass is what is being watered and saturated completely, which is why you don't want to water it halfway twice a week. It's better to water it all the way and saturate it when it actually needs it, because you want it to dry out to whatever level of dryness it needs in between watering. So completely saturate it and dump the saucer out. And then drainage, of course, I'm saying dump the saucer out. There's so many pots out there on the market that don't have holes in them. And I drill holes in everything. These are I love to get little thrifted, handmade pots and mugs and things. And my kids are my hole pot drillers, of hole drillers in the pots. You can get a ceramic bit or a diamond bit, get the clay wet, let it soak so it's a little more porous or more pliable, and then drill a hole in it. This one already had a hole. These have holes in them now. I know that you can grow plants in pots that don't have holes, but then you really have to pay attention to the soil. I would only do that with plants that like to be wet. It would be easier to do in terracotta where you know it's going to dry out versus plastic or a glazed porcelain. But I drill holes, and if you don't want to drill a hole, use a cache pot, which is just a pot inside a pot where you water it and then you pull the plastic pot out and dump out the water and put it back. But drainage is really important, and it's just going to save you a lot of it just adds, if you don't have drainage, it adds another variable to think about, my plant's not doing well. Why is it not doing well? You have all these variables. We want to just eliminate like root rot and lack of drainage as one of those things. Soil is, it provides water retention, the nutrients and the oxygen to the roots, and is an anchor for the plant. And there are only a couple types of soil that I generally use. I use all-purpose potting mix or succulent potting mix. If you grow orchids or African violets, there's potting mix for those too, which I do use if I have those kind of plants. I don't have any of those right now. If your plant is getting less light, like we talked about a second ago, consider adding extra perlite to the soil to add more aeration to the roots. And so it's not going to get waterlogged from lack of photosynthesis. Your soil type is determined by, and on the other hand, if you're using like a terracotta pot that dries out pretty quickly, maybe having a little more dense soil will be fine. If you bring a plant home from the nursery and it's the nursery they have so much light that they have to water their plants all the time. They might be using a denser soil than what you would want to use at home because they don't want to water as much. So it's something to think about. It's not too big of a deal usually, but if you think your plant feels waterlogged, like this plant right here, my little calathea, is always waterlogged. So what I'm going to do when I go, but it likes to have it's in good light and it likes fairly moist soil, but it's never sucking it all up. I think that the soil in this plant here is too dense. So I'm just going to repot it and add more perlite to it because it's just not drying out in the time frame that it should, even though it's in the soil that it was in the nursery. And these are notoriously finicky plants, so I have to really coddle it to make it grow, but I'm glad it's not dead yet. Someone told me once calatheas are, just think of them like flowers that you buy in the store, like a bundle of flowers. You just buy one, enjoy the leaves, it'll die. And then you buy another one because they're not that expensive. They're actually cheaper than a bouquet of flowers on Orchis. So might as well just like keep. So anyway, but that one is alive. I was kind of surprised. I didn't expect it to live, but it does. I think I need to do this little swap out the soil. So your soil type, light and watering impact that too, which I didn't know until I really started thinking about light and how it relates to every other aspect of plant growth. When you, and the pot size matters. We're going to talk about that though when we get to repotting. These are the two types of soil mix that I have around in my house. Plus I always have a bag of perlite and that's it. And I don't mix my own soil. These are just fine. You can do that if you'd like, but don't use topsoil or garden soil ever. And I'm sure most of you know that, but I've plant sat for plants that I'm like looking at the soil. I'm like, this is soil that's like meant for dumping in your garden. This is not, no wonder this plant's not doing very well. So you're in a hurry and you need to pot up a plant and that's all you have. It's tempting to use it, but don't do that. Just wait until you can get the right kind of soil. Fertilize, this is easy. Fertilize, there's rules on fertilize this plant, at half strength every 2 weeks or every other month or whatever. Just fertilize when it shows new growth. So here's a fiddle leaf fig, has a new leaf and it has a bud. I have a bunch of fiddle leaf figs at home and none of them have had any new leaves all winter long. Therefore, I'm not fertilizing them. But as soon as the day length gets longer or I move closer to a window and I start seeing new leaves, that's when I will fertilize. That's usually in the spring and summer, but not always. Some plants grow all winter long, and so you can fertilize them all winter long. And I'm not picky about fertilizer. I just use any houseplant fertilizer, usually at half strength, but it depends. Some aren't so strong, and you can play around with that. Fertilizer isn't going to make your houseplants grow. It will just support the growth that's already happening. So it doesn't do any good to fertilize a plant like the ZZ plant that's sitting in 50-foot candles away from a window. Fertilizing it isn't going to make it grow. In fact, it could harm it because now it has too many minerals in the soil. So you're fertilizing to support the growth that is already happening. And then repotting. This is a Dracaena that I just propagated last summer. By propagate, I mean I cut the top off of it because it was getting long and leggy, rooted it in water and put it in soil. And I was surprised when we pulled it out this spring, a month ago, it already had all these roots and it had 0 roots like 6 months ago. I did not know that they grow roots that fast. It doesn't necessarily, it's not root bound yet. I mean, it is a little bit, but it's not doing it any harm, but it's going to become root bound soon, probably at the end of this summer. So we did go ahead and repot it into a better pot anyway. But you can pull, I just pulled it out, or my kid did, and to check on it to see what do the roots look like. And a lot of times you can do that. And if it is root bound, it's going to come up in one big chunk. And if it's not, you're going to lift it and it's going to be all crumbly and you'll know that it's not root bound. So you repot when it's root bound, you can check. There are a few plants, houseplants that don't mind being root bound. In fact, they might prefer it because it means that they're more guaranteed to not become waterlogged. If there's too much soil, the roots can't reach the soil, the roots can't take in all that water, and or the plant is in a pot that's too big for it and it just can't access all that water. So it's staying wet all the time. Some plants really hate that. So those are the plants that say, this plant doesn't mind being root bound. That's like a money plant is one of them that likes to be in a smaller pot, but most plants don't like to be root bound. And then how long has the plant been in the same soil? This is a question of soil structure, aeration, and nutrients too. You can fertilize a plant that's been in the same pot for, say like we have big giant plants at the library that I've never transplanted, therefore they have not been transplanted for at least 6 years. They don't need bigger pots, but they would really benefit from being taken out of those great big pots, getting rid of some of the soil and putting new soil in there. It's not an issue so much of root boundness because the pots are as big as we're going to get them, but they would benefit from new soil. So we need to do this with some of our larger library plants. It's been more than 3 years since some of them have, and the soil structure just breaks down, and you can fertilize all you want, but there are still components of having good fresh soil that has good aeration and that would benefit those plants. They're not dying, but they would do better if they had new soil. These are these 2 fiddle-leaf figs that we were at. That's my oldest kiddo. We were at Home Depot, not planning to buy any plants as usual, but did. And they were like 75% off because they were so root bound. So they were like $30 for these huge. I wanted to buy all 4 of them that they had, but I only had room in my car for 2. That still required me to we were on our way to go do a big hike, and we had to take all of our backpacking gear out to fit these plants in on the side. And then anyway, they were so root bound with roots coming out the top and circling. I still haven't transplanted one of them. It's still alive and it has no new growth on it. It needs to be transplanted for sure, but you can rescue plants like this that are very root bound from even the big box stores. And as long as you know what to look for, there was no disease on them. They just were root bound. They had some weird growth patterns and needed some pruning to get them in a more aesthetically pleasing shape. They're fine, and they're doing fine at home. And I was super excited to find them for like $30. So when you repot, this is this jade plant. I can't grow, like I said, tomatoes or on Orchis Island, but I can grow jade. Anybody can grow jade. So this is our huge jade plant that weighs a ton. And when we wanted to repot it, because of the soil was getting old, not because those roots are especially root bound. When you do that, when you repot, just go one size up, ideally, with your plant, with your pot size, or you're going to have too much soil and the plant won't be able to access all that water. And then one thing I didn't used to do, but I do now, is remove some of the old soil with a chopstick or a fork or something. Get rid of like maybe 50% if you can of that old, actually take it out of the roots. You're exposing the roots, but you're getting rid of more of that old soil so that you can replace it with fresh, because the fresh soil will really benefit the plant. And then the fun part is pruning and propagating and sharing plants and giving plants away to your friends and taking in plants from other people. So here is why we prune. This is a classic Ficus elastica, or a rubber tree, growing in 4 different ways. There's what it would do on its own, is the photo on the left. It will just grow one, if you have just one stem, and a lot of you may have these at home, it'll just grow and grow and grow like a Jack and the Beanstalk. And it probably won't branch out unless it has a lot of light. It might grow one little branch off to the side. So it needs to be pruned in order to get a shape like this, like a tree. This is a plant that probably was bought from the nursery with 2 or 3 stems, but also hasn't been pruned, so it just will go taller and taller. And if you like look for photos like this online, or you maybe have one or know someone who does, they get these, this one amazes me. And they've made the best of that. That's super cool that it's like 20 feet tall and it's attached to the wall. I mean, if you like that, and I don't mind it, it's like kind of its own little art piece, you know, it's like a little art installation of Ficus elastica. I like it, but that's not going to work for most of us. I like this shape, but in order to get this shape, you have to know how to prune it that way. So the way if you want a tree, you need it to actually grow like this one on the left. You have to let it get a little bit Jack and the Beanstalky, because where you cut it is where it's going to branch out. And then once it gets to the height you want it, then you're going to get pretty ruthless with, it's going to branch out, you're going to cut it again, and it's going to branch out and you're going to cut it again to build that tree-like shape. And that's true of a lot of plants that need that pruning. You get to decide what shape you want, and you can look online and say, I want it to be like a big bush, like maybe like this, but more bushy, or I want it to be like a tree, or I want it to be like an art installation. Whatever it is that you want, you get to prune it and decide. So it's an aesthetic thing. It doesn't hurt the plant that it's not being pruned. It just is what kind of space it fits in your house and what you want it to look like. And then all of these cuttings that you're taking off can become new plants. That's the propagation part that you can give away or start new plants. I do all of these different propagation methods, but I do stem cuttings the most. Most of us do this. It's the easiest, and it works really well for almost everything. You can do, for some plants like African violets and a lot of succulents, you can do the leaf cuttings where they grow these little babies. I've never had a lot of luck with getting these babies to look like the mother plant. I have more luck if I actually take a stem of the echeveria and grow it from the stem rather than the leaf. But this is a fun science project. And then some plants like to be divided, or they have little offsets like the pilea, where you just detach the offset from the mother plant, or a peace lily or a ZZ plant you divide when they get too big for their pot. Or you can do air layering. I was going to demonstrate that today, but I couldn't peat moss. There's none of this. I can't remember what that's called. The moss. I couldn't find it at either hardware store on an Orchis, so I can't do that today. But basically, this is a great thing to do if you need to resolve an issue with a ficus or another really overgrown plant. You can't really cut this off and put it in water. So you wanted to like rehabilitate a really overgrown plant that is not eligible for being a stem cutting. Air layering is the way to do that. And so you cut a little, with a knife, you would cut halfway through the stem, maybe put little rooting hormone on the cut, wrap it in moss, make sure the moss is up in the cut. There's videos on YouTube on how to do this. And then wrap it up with plastic and tie it. And then the roots will grow into the moss from the stem itself. And then when it has roots, you just detach it. And that's an alternative way to do a much bigger plant, to propagate a much bigger plant. You could also just cut it off if you don't want to keep the top half and discard it. That's certainly an option if you're not trying to propagate. This is my propagation station at home. And we have a whole bunch. We're always have more plants coming out of the propagation station than what we have room for in the house. That's why when my kids count the number of plants in my house, they come up with these really astronomical numbers, because they're counting all these little ones like this that kind of like eventually we'll give them away because we can't like keep producing plants, but we have an abundance of plants. They're really fun to trade with friends and kids. Actually, the next photo. Yes, the kids sold plants at the Christmas market at the library this year, because they're like, what are we going to do with all these plants? So they had a little plant sale of our propagated plants that were coming out of the propagation station. So as soon as you see your plant in a glass of water growing roots, which some of them are up here on the table too, it can be transferred into soil. And sometimes I keep them in their bottles longer than I need to, just because they're pretty and I like them, and they like have sunlight coming into them. They say to not do this in direct light, but I do. And I haven't had any problems so far. And so it's just like it's another little art installation on my kitchen counter of like jars, antique jars, and jelly jars and whatnot with plants in them. Instead of like buying flowers at the market, I have this, and I think that's kind of fun. And it's time for us to plant pretty much all of these up because they're outgrowing their bottles. But succulent stems, you do not have to root in water. You can cut them and then let them scab over and then put them directly into soil. I sometimes do them in water anyway. This is a Christmas cacti right there. And that doesn't need to be done in water, but I did, and it works fine. So you can, there's like more than one way to do a lot of things. And you learn through experimenting. So the bottom line is, if you know the water, the light requirements, and you know what your plant's getting, and if you know the water, like water when completely dry, partially dry, or keep it moist, if you know those two things about the types of plants you have, you don't have to know even the name of it or every plant in the book. You just got to know the ones you have. If you know your plants, it's like a relationship. When I made this slide, and this looks like a relationship slide, like meet its needs, know your plant, give it what it needs, manage your expectations, let go of control. Like if you know all of that, then you will be fine. And if the light meter is like your friend, if you can get the light right and then get the water to match the light, and then everything else falls into place, you can grow almost anything indoors. Anything indoors that can handle that amount of light, realizing that the light that we have indoors is way less than we think it is, and way less than our eye tells it is, and way less than what's in a nursery. So light, learn the rules, learn the why, and don't worry about the rules. Don't worry about what's on the little tag that comes with the plant, and you can grow anything else. So yeah, that's it. But any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
When you're repotting something, and let's say it is root bound, do you ever, and maybe it's even circulating,
Yeah.
but
Question is, if you have a plant that's root bound, you bring it out.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the Christmas cactus that I have.
Mhm.
And do you cut those off before you put them, or do you pry them apart, or what, do you just leave it and throw it back in with new soil?
Yeah, I love this part of repotting. I love to rip apart the roots and to get in there and pull the old soil out and loosen up root bound roots and untangle them. I just love that. It's like getting dirty with your houseplants, but you don't get to get dirty with houseplants like you do outside. So I like when I get to get dirty with houseplants. So yes, I rip them apart. If they break, I don't worry about it. Some plants have more sensitive roots and don't, like it'll say like, be really careful when you repot this plant. Any disturbance to its roots cause it to go into shock. With a Christmas cactus, that's not the case. So, and most houseplants are hardy and are fine. And so I just rip it apart. I would only cut them if they were really too long to fit into the new pot that you're putting them into. But even then, you can just kind of spread them out as best you can. When I repotted one of those super root bound ficus, I had to cut some of those off in order to untangle them more, or they would have. If you don't get in there and rip those roots out, they're going to have a really hard time growing out of their root boundness. They're just going to keep growing in that pattern because they can't get out of it and access the new soil. So yeah, you can use a tool to do that, to really get in there and rip them up. And usually it won't do. The plant is going to go into a little bit of shock anyway from being repotted. But so as long as I'm doing that, I just want to pull it apart and get those roots loose so that they can access new soil. Any other questions? Yeah.
For those of you that are on Zoom, you can use the chat function to ask questions. At this time, we don't have any, but I have a question.
Okay.
What type of water do you use to water your plants? Do you use filtered water, or do you let water sit that's city water?
Yeah.
Is that important?
It can be. I don't live on East Sound water, so our water is well water. It's not chlorinated. So I water straight out of the sink. But if I were living in a city and had chlorinated water, especially if I knew the water content or was seeing problems with my plants, I would maybe consider using filtered water. or distilled water. I've read that the calatheas don't like fluoride. They don't even like perlite that much. I don't know if that's true. I haven't experimented with that. Perlite has fluoride in it just because of the type of material that it is. Most plants, the conventional mainstream houseplants, are fine with anything, but if it's a more delicate, finicky plant, then and you're seeing brown spots that could be from mineral accumulation in the water, then you could do that, but I don't do that. You had a question back there?
How do you deal with fungus gnats?
Pests. I didn't talk about pests. I don't have any fungus gnats. The pests that I get, I was gonna do some slides on pests and I didn't, but the main pest I have is scale. I haven't had fungus gnats, but if you have fungus gnats, I forgot to put this out, but I don't just, what I do when I have aphids once in a while, when I bring plants in from the summer into the house in the fall, fungus gnats could be happening because of overwatering. How to get rid of them? I use insecticidal soap for everything, or maybe neem, and I'm not sure because I don't have fungus gnats which one is better for that. And if those two things don't get rid of it, I usually don't. Well, I'd isolate the plant to quarantine it so it doesn't spread to others. And then if a plant is having that much, I will often just discard it. But if it's a big, beautiful, like ficus tree that you don't want to get rid of, then definitely go on. I prefer to use like the county or the state extension websites for that. There's a lot of guidelines versus blogs and plant apps, but say like put curry in your soil for fungus. Like, no, that's not going to do it. That'll mold too and create more mold. That's like an organic material that's not meant to be part of soil. So, yeah, I don't know specifically much about fungus gnats, but what plant do you have it on?
Like, I don't know, I know a lot about them. It's a cyclical issue.
Yeah.
And so you want to catch it like while they're at a specific point in their breeding situation. So I've been using a lot and off and on for years. I've got like hundreds of plants, and I use those. They're like bright yellow flag things. They're sticky, you know.
Yeah.
And that works for a while, but then you break the cycle for a little while, but then you bring in new plants.
Yeah.
And when you have that many plants, where you can't really isolate. I mean, there's definitely stuff isolate.
Totally.
Hundreds of plants. So it's kind of like okay,
I have learned to let go, like my other slide said, like if the plant is really struggling with some kind of pest and it's just not, I can't get rid of it, I just sometimes will let the plant go. I could not get rid of scale on my lemon tree and I just composted it. For years, I could not get rid of the scale. But I would check the county extension or state extension websites for the most like horticulturally sound ways to get rid of any kind of pest, because those are so unique to each plant and each situation too. And then check for overwatering in the future. It won't help the plant that already is infested. But yeah, but Kate.
Could crowding and lack of good air circulation in your house around the areas where you have a lot of plants contribute to that sort of pest?
Potentially. Nurseries have obviously amazing air circulation, partly to prevent that from taking hold. So I don't know once you have it, I don't know if that would help get rid of it. But yeah.
Well, I'll let Perry focus.
Perry.
Do you rotate your plants to
part
of your routine?
Yeah.
Does that help with the-
Turning them. Yeah. She asked if I rotate the plants so they don't grow towards the sun. Definitely, unless you want them to look that way. Sometimes you'll see dracaenas, big old dracaenas, where the stems are like, they obviously have been done this on purpose. All the stems grow towards the light and they leave it that way for a year and then they turn it and then the stem grows the other way and it's like this squiggly thing. But I don't want that with most of my plants, so I definitely rotate them so that they don't bend too much, for sure. Yeah.
My question, can you hear?
I can repeat the question.
In the home can hear, it's all on the. It's sort of about certain plants need rest supposedly in order to bloom, if I've got this right. So I have a clivia, which is producing many of its kind in this big container, but it's in an indirect light situation. And I thought it wouldn't bloom. And I know it comes from stock where it's bloomed, and that person sometimes puts them outdoors. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm not letting it rest. And so I moved it finally to the dark.
Okay.
For the winter.
Uh-huh.
And I'm about to bring it back. Is that typical, or is it just the nature of that plant maybe, or
Typical that
that it needs actually to not be watered, not except if it starts getting, I mean, I didn't really water it more than once or twice over the entire winter.
yeah.
It still looks good.
So, and you said it, aclivia?
Yeah. It has
So-
the broad leaves.
The question was about aclivia and if it needs like a period of dormancy, basically, where it's getting less light, less water, and more cooler temperatures likely. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah.
And whether that's necessary to bring it back into bloom?
Yeah,
That's what you're wondering.
Yeah.
And right now you're bringing it out or about to bring it out?
I am. Well, I have to
Yeah.
repot it first
Yeah.
because to take the ones, it's doing well enough to make duplicates. I assume it's doing well.
So it's growing
It's growing.
Yeah.
But it's just not producing the beautiful flowers that. would be
yet.
nice.
It's not producing the beautiful flowers yet. So you're bringing it out. I think that I would try it and see what happens. I think that, I mean, I've tried to overwinter poinsettias doing that where they need that period of dark, and I haven't had a lot of luck. It's just some plants are just so far away from their native environment and conditions. And then you add in that it needs this period of dormancy and this darkness, and it's just, there's so much going on, and maybe they're not that adaptable, so they can be hard to replicate what a nursery is going to do. But I would do what you're doing and see what happens. And especially when it gets when you bring it out of dormancy and put it in the light, I think it'll bloom.
Yeah.
I mean, but
I'll let you know.
text me.
I will.
Well, text us all photos and let us know what happens. A lot of those things where you read conflicting information, maybe this will work or maybe it won't. I just try it and I see what happens. And if it doesn't work, I'll try something else the following year, or give the plant away and let somebody else have a try at it. And that's how I get a lot of plants too, is like this, like, Dieffenbachia and I don't get along, but I can totally handle your Christmas cacti, like whatever it is. So yeah, I would try it.
You could also take the self-propagated plant,
Mhm.
the new one, and put it in a different location.
Sure.
And
You
see,
could divide it.
since it's gonna be divided anyway.
Yeah.
And see if that totally.
Yeah.
Add one more berry.
Yeah, just play with it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
I didn't hear anything about a corn plant. I have lots and lots of them, and I've got one now that has great new growth coming off the bottom of the stalk. Am I cutting the new growth off to propagate in its own pot, or am I cutting the main stalk and then trying to take a propagation from that?
Yeah, a corn plant is a type of Dracaena. This isn't working anymore.
No,
Did it turn
it's
off?
not.
Okay. So how to propagate a corn plant? That was the question. And how to prune it? Okay. How to prune it or propagate it?
Yeah,
Both?
yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's more than, let's see where I have pictures of that. So this is I think this is called a dragon tree, but it's also a Dracaena, the same family of
Yeah.
plant. So you would do that the same. This is the top of a long single stem plant that was getting late, it wasn't very full and pretty. I didn't like the look of it, so I just cut the top off without any air layering of any kind and stuck it in water, and it grew roots. I have not done that with it. I don't have a corn plant, but it's the same variety. It's the same growth pattern. It's the same type of plant. So you could cut the tops off and they will branch out. I wish I had a picture of what the bottom half of that plant looked like, but it has little buds that came out. I think 3 new stems are growing from this, what was left after I cut it was just a stem with no leaves on it at all in soil. And it grows. Plants are like magic, but they're not. It's just biology, right? So So it grew, so I have the bottom half of this plant and the top half of this plant. A corn plant is the same. You could do the same thing. You can even, if what I could have done, the stem was like 3 feet, I could have cut it in like 6-inch increments and stuck the 6-inch chunks of stem into soil, and it would grow roots. And then once it has roots, it'll grow leaves, because they're pretty hardy plants. So as long as your corn plant, whatever variety you have, is healthy and fairly hardy and not finicky, yes, you can do all of those things. You can air layer it too. If you want, if you have like those rubber plants that are really overgrown, corn plants can get really overgrown too. And if you have a big, huge piece that you want to cut off and make it a new plant, you can air layer it in place rather than trying to cut it off and stick it in water. That makes sense? So it just depends. You could send me a picture of it and I could like, and it depends what, those are such fun plants to get really artsy with, the Dracaena types that grow and they have, I don't know, I just have a picture now, but the ones that have these like kind of fireworks style leaves, the corn plant leaves are thicker than these type leaves are, but you'll see all these fun, like a 20-year-old Dracaena can look really fun. And it's kind of a minimalist aesthetic sometimes because they don't have a lot of leaves at the bottom, but there's all kinds of ways how you prune it and how high or low you do it just depends on what you want it to look like. And you can take the cuttings and put them back in the pot eventually once they've rooted and have like a multi-level plant, or you can start new ones. Just depends on how you want it to look. Did that answer your question?
Can I remove the side shoots to propagate on their own?
They would have to have enough stem. Yeah. If they have a full, yeah, for sure. As long as there's not just leaves, but they have grown some stem on the side shoots. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay. Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. You can text me pictures of your plant. I like to look at plants. Yeah.
Great,
And
thank
then,
you.
oh, and don't forget to come to the library and check out the light meter. It'll be ready in like a week. Okay, that's this. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Great, thank you, Lynn, that was wonderful.
Welcome.
So before we say goodbye to our virtual audience, thank you again to the library. Thank you, Lynn. Wonderful. I did one of those things one time where I had a big plant like that. I don't know what kind it was. I knew nothing about indoor plants, but it was growing up and along the side of our ceiling. And one day I had just had enough of it and I took a saw and I just cut it off at like 2 feet above the ground and it grew up again. Hey, it was a miracle. So plants are miracle things. Anyway, so thank you all for coming and we'll say goodbye to our virtual audience now and stop our recording. Thank you.